I'm Steve Clifford, psychotherapist. Welcome to my therapy room. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a way of thinking that many of us fall into. It's a way of thinking that through the years can become a habit, and it can really have some negative consequences for us. So what I thought I'd like to do is kind of demystify this kind of mode of thinking and just bring your attention to several of the ways in which it can impact on you and your outlook. I suppose that probably a way to illustrate this with a kind of an example would be to say, if you were to go to your opticians and you sit there and have a kind of a machine put in front of you, the optician will slip lenses in front of your eyes. Now the idea of this is that each lens will bring about a little bit more clarity, and so you'll be able to kind of see things more clearly. Now if you can imagine that that same optician was now slipping lenses in front of your eyes that were blurring or distorting your world, then I think you've really been for a problem. Now what we've got to do is, if we can identify any negative, unhelpful thinking that may be going on, just identifying it, maybe changing it, it's just like lifting away one of those lenses, and that can really make a difference to your kind of outlook and the way you see things. So I'll start with one of the commonest types of unhelpful thinking that many of us fall into from time to time, is something that we know as catastrophizing. Now, catastrophizing is a lovely word. It really kind of sums up this style of thinking that where something starts off maybe small and kind of snowballs into this great big negative mess. It's kind of this, it's a lovely word that I use. It's kind of not a very good medical term, but I call it stinking thinking. You know, that sort of thinking that goes round and round and round and round till eventually we're in a really black place. Making mountains out of molehills is another description for this. I'll give you an example. An example might be you've prepared a meal for your partner. You've been looking forward to them coming round, and you get a text. And a text says, "I'm sorry, I can't make it." Well, immediately, before you've kind of given them even time to explain why, you're thinking, "Oh, they don't want to make it. They think my food's rubbish. They've never liked my food. In fact, I'm a lousy cook. In fact, I've never been a good cook. In fact, I'm the worst cook in the world. And in fact, this just might signify that my relationship's over. They've gone off me. If they don't want to come round," and before you know it, you're sitting there all alone with no friends and no partner. You really have kind of plummeted into this negative place. So that's one way of thinking that, you know, is not a particularly helpful one. Another unhelpful thinking style is something we call mind reading. I don't know how many of you do this, but it's that sort of thing when you kind of look at somebody out the corner of your eye and you see that maybe they're not smiling. You think, perhaps they've got off me. And think, well, perhaps they, you know, and you have all these negative thoughts. Usually when we do this, it's about ourselves. So there's kind of this look or reaction. We assume we know what the other person's thinking, but we can't do that. You know, we can't think. None of us has a kind of a extra sensory perception where we can really read other people's minds. It's nonsense. So next time you find yourself doing this, ask yourself, am I assuming that I know what others are thinking? What evidence is there for this assumption? Tell yourself that these are your own thoughts, they're not theirs. So if you can find another more balanced way of thinking, of kind of looking at things, that would be so much better. And while we're talking about mind reading, what about crystal ball gazing? How many of you spend your time predicting? How ridiculous, believing we know what's going to happen in the future. But we still do it. You know, so many times clients tell me that they were worried about going here or worried about going there, they're getting all anxious, they almost thought of cancelling, but in the event it wasn't half as bad as they thought. So the next time you find yourself doing it, ask yourself, how likely is it that this will really happen? And doing so will really spare you an awful lot of worry. Okay, now here is another type of thinking that that people fall into, something called emotional reasoning. Now, emotional reasoning is relying very heavily on your feelings, and doing that can often be misleading. For example, if you feel jealous, it doesn't mean that the other person's having an affair. If you wake up feeling, got that horrible feeling of dread in your stomach, it doesn't mean it's going to be an awful day. So start to detach your feelings from your thoughts, because they don't always match up, and sometimes we might just be giving them just a little bit too much power over us. Another way of thinking is something we call all or nothing thinking. This sort of black and white thinking is either right or it's wrong, good or it's bad. There's no middle ground, and this again is not such a helpful thing, because, well, there is middle ground, there's always middle ground, but having just extremes of thinking, it can be quite limiting. So this is the real world. We have to remember that things aren't totally black or white. There is grey in the middle. Another thing and this is something that you probably, if you listen to people talking, you will probably hear other people doing this. And this is shoulds, musts and oughts. In my old therapy room, I used to have like a swear box, and every time somebody uttered the word should or I must or I ought to, I'd get them to put 10p for charity in the swear box. And it worked quite well. By the end of the year I had quite a good lot of money to donate. But shoulds, musts and oughts, replace them with could, might and maybe. The word should, actually, just out of interest, comes from an Anglo-Saxon word, and that Anglo-Saxon word is the word scold. So when we're saying I should, we're saying really that we're going to scold. So I think that kind of says it all, really. Now, another thing that people often do, and this is something called filtering. This is where we filter out the positive and we focus on the negative, and we'll dismiss anything positive. So, people do this quite a lot, and particularly if you're depressed or down, you're much more likely to look at things in this kind of negative way, and begin to kind of filter out and to screen out anything positive. So it's hard to change, but it can be done. Again, you have to step back and ask yourself, maybe what would somebody else say in this situation? What would my best friend, for example, say? So that's a really good thing to do when you find yourself being caught up in just this negative filtering all the time. Now, putting a negative bias, bigging up the negatives, is very much something that goes hand in hand with that negative filter. So again, try to not do that if you can, because what it does, each time you do it, it will just erode your self-esteem and your self-confidence. So that again is something that would be good to, if you can just avoid a little bit. Having one rule for ourselves and one for others, is that something that applies to you? We tend to see only the good and the positive aspects of others, and yet we compare ourselves negatively against them. It's time to tear up that rule book. Time to write another that applies equally to us and to them. So begin to think about making a few changes. Now, I could go on and on. There are lots and lots and lots of these unhelpful ways of thinking. And in fact, if you want to drop me an email via my website, I'll send you a list of these. And quite a good thing is to, next time you find yourself having, that feeling, that kind of negative feeling in the pit of your stomach, just jot down what's happening, jot down what you're thinking at that time, and you will probably find that there's an unhelpful thought there, an unhelpful way of thinking is there. So identifying these, and you'll find that you tend to probably have 2 or 3 that you do more than others. And once you start finding out that these are going on, you can then start to make changes. So get a pad, remember the rule: whenever you feel bad, write your thoughts on a pad. Okay. I think this is probably the place to leave it today. So until next time, thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.